Truth Caviar, the show about ideas that matter. Hosted by global thinkers Brent M. Eastwood and Vadim Bichutsky.
Welcome in, everybody. Hope y'all are having a great week. This is the Truth Caviar Show. I am Vadim Bichutsky, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Brent M. Eastwood. Today, we're talking all about crime and lawlessness on America's streets. We've all seen viral videos of extreme lawlessness on American streets. So recently, Tucker had a segment on Wawa in Philadelphia being ransacked, and Hannity had a video of a woman being beaten on New York City subway by a career criminal with 7 prior arrests who was let go. The victim said that she might lose both of her eyes. So that's just some of the examples of what is going on American streets and lawlessness being out of control. So crime is out of control in this country, inflamed by a dangerous narrative being pushed by progressive elites and activists, corporate media, and academia. America's criminal justice system is systematically oppressive and racist. That America has a mass incarceration problem. Too many people are in jail, driven by overpolicing and overprosecution, and that cops are hunting down Black and brown people. This narrative can be quickly debunked with official crime data, but progressives don't care about data. The narrative is what matters to these people. Progressive policy prescriptions, such as defund or abolish the police and emptying prisons, would wreak havoc on the same marginalized communities progressives claim to be fighting for. That's because crime isn't uniformly distributed across the country. In fact, there are huge disparities in crime rates between wealthy, white liberal enclaves like Martha's Vineyard and Georgetown and Black and brown neighborhoods like Chicago's West Side or southwestern Baltimore. About 2% of U.S. counties account for over 50% of murders, while 54% of counties have no murders at all. Neighborhoods in the same city can have crime rates that differ by a factor of 100. For example, Chicago's West Garfield Park, which is a very high crime area, and Forest Glen, which is a low crime area. In the largest crime spike since the country got correctly tough on crime in the 1990s, with mandatory minimum sentences, 3-strike laws, truth in sentencing regimes, and proactive policing, America witnessed over 21,000 murders in 2020, a 30% increase over 2019. What's remarkable is that while homicide rates increased for all racial groups, the percentages of white and Asian homicide victims actually went down. This means that the increase in murders has disproportionately fell on Black and brown populations. Black men, in particular, are 10 times more likely to be murder victims than whites. Contrary to activist talking points, America doesn't have an especially harsh justice system. Most prisoners are violent, chronic offenders with long criminal records and high recidivism rates. And violent offenders who aren't prosecuted or released early will, in most cases, reoffend in high-crime, vulnerable communities. A typical prisoner is a violent offender with 10 prior arrests and 5 prior convictions. The median time served in prison is just 15 months. We hear progressives scream that our prisons are full of nonviolent drug offenders, but such offenders are only about 14% of the prison populations. And of these, most are doing time for drug trafficking, not drug possession. Prison sentences are reserved for violent, repeat offenders. Drug offenses and violent offenses are correlated. Between 2009 and 2019, America's incarceration rate fell by 17%. Arrests fell 25%, while the number of full-time police officers fell by 2%. And President Trump's First Step Act will likely reduce incarceration and arrests even further. Incarceration rates have declined for all demographic groups since 2006, but especially for blacks. And America's criminal justice system is less punitive than those in other Western liberal democracies. It is a myth that crime is a function of poverty and economics. Lawlessness is a function of morality and values, particularly behaviors such as entitlement, antisocial disposition, and substance abuse, as well as street gang culture. These behaviors are symptoms of family breakdown and fatherlessness. But a bad father is worse than no father at all. Cashless bail reform and pretrial release are correlated with increased crime. Cash bail is unfair to poor people, as one's liberty is conditioned on wealth. Instead of focusing on cash, a better approach to bail reform is to focus on risk. Empower judges to impose pretrial detention on violent or high-risk offenders. Unbiased algorithmic risk assessment tools could play a role in predicting a defendant's risk to reoffend. Police use of force are extremely rare, with 99% of arrests involving no use of force. And when a police officer does use force, in an overwhelming number of cases, it's justified. Incidents of excessive force are virtually non-existent. It is a myth driven by viral social media videos like George Floyd that police violence is a problem and that cops are out to get black and brown people. Defunding the police would put minority populations in grave danger. More police means less crime. Depolicing leads to more crime. According to research, U.S. cities need more police, and the return on investment from investing on policing is astronomical. One additional dollar invested in police returns $1.63 to the taxpayer, a 63% return on investment. Replacing certain police actions with mental health or social workers may actually be counterproductive and make things worse. Increased policing and crime reduction disproportionately help black and brown people, especially black men. If Black lives matter, then police and being tough on criminals matter. The progressive narrative that racial disparities in arrests imply that law enforcement is systematically racist is easily debunked. Police deploy resources to areas with high crime rates. Those rates happen to be majority black and brown communities. This leads to police having more encounters with minority populations. And once you control for crime rates, criminal activity, and other relevant variables, racial disparities in arrests and in sentencing all but disappear. Racial differences in arrests isn't a function of systemic racism. It's a function of crime. Irresponsible false narrative reduces police presence in high crime neighborhoods and puts the very same people on whose behalf progressives say they're fighting in greater danger and with devastating consequences. Without law and order, there are no private property rights. Without private property rights, there is no capitalism. Without capitalism, there is no freedom. Without freedom, we are no different than a third world country that you don't want to live in.
You know, it's really interesting that it's the rich suburbs and suburbanites with low crime areas and people who live in wealthy communities, gated communities. They want to reform policing and the criminal justice system as if they are these big experts in crime policy. And then the poor minorities in low-income neighborhoods have to deal with the repercussions of these bad policies. That really affects low-income people who are minorities. Now, the reformers, the progressive reformers, wouldn't dare walk these neighborhoods during the day or at night. But they want to help the wealthy reformers. They look at things through a national lens rather than a neighborhood lens. Most crime is in certain neighborhoods. Most locations have a low crime rate and low, if minuscule, murder rate. maybe no murders at all. But some neighborhoods are the most dangerous on earth, too. But this myth of high incarceration, most prisoners are actually, as Vadim pointed out, habitual violent criminals. If they're let out of prison, they would offend again. They are going to get arrested again, and they will be jailed again. That's recidivism. So we're looking in this podcast at negative trends overall in the United States. And these are drastic cuts to pretrial detention, reduction of police budgets, defund the police, then police officers resigning because of the way they're treated and their positions remain unfilled and recruiting is very difficult to get new police. You decriminalize with these reforms, decriminalization of minor and even major offenses sometimes. And then the activists demonize the police. So more police don't want to serve their communities. There's mass decarceration and depolicing. There's the erosion of public safety. There's class action lawsuits against police and class action lawsuits against prisons. Now, we think, and I think, it's a good thing that video cameras and to a certain extent, a lesser extent, social media can spread information on police misconduct. We want police misconduct out there. We want to deal with it. If it's a criminal investigation, it should be investigated, not covered up. So the trends with police cameras and sharing video when people have video phones and on their smartphones, this is usually a good thing. But sometimes the narrative gets changed, then spreads false information and rumors. And there is this pressure on policymakers to do something politically and legislatively, even if that doing something is a bad policy. And as I said before, the bad policies hurt the minorities in poor neighborhoods. Then you get these anti-police documentaries. These create victims as household names that go viral. And then we get a false narrative. Sometimes it's a true narrative, sometimes it's false, but it spreads virally and it forces policymakers to do something that is often the wrong solution. Now, in 2020, we had 21,000 murders in the United States. That's the first time since the 1990s the country has seen that many. That's a 30% increase over 2019. Then you have the anti-police rhetoric in media and academia. And this is something that is really hard to overcome. So decarceration between 2009 and 2019, a 10-year growth of imprison rate went down. Arrests went down 25% with depolicing, and progressives blame lack of jobs.
Yeah, for the last decade, we have been incarcerating less and less people.
Fewer people from 2009 to 2019. So the imprisonment rate went down in those 10 years.
Exactly.
And arrests went down 25%.
So we hear this narrative from progressives that our criminal justice system is very punitive, too punitive. So I just want to read this quote from Rafael Manguel's book, Criminal Injustice. Quote, "But if the most important goal is to improve the quality of life in America's most dangerous neighborhoods, the pursuit of that goal must reflect the recognition of the reality that our criminal justice system sometimes, indeed often, fails to be harsh enough." End quote.
Yeah. And the other thing is that violent crime is hyper concentrated in certain geographies and certain neighborhoods and certain demographics. So many Black and Latino males are involved with violent crime. Now, one of the myths is that criminalization is because of poverty and joblessness. The data does not support this. And if you take a look at some of these cities that are run by Democrats, open air drug markets, people passed out on the street from drugs, cities that of people who would say, oh, we're environmentalists, we believe in a clean environment, but their own environments of where they live are dirty. And there's open air drug markets, homelessness. We talked about the rise of methamphetamine and fentanyl that adds to homelessness. So these are the types of things that lead to what we see in the cities. Flash mobs with these smash and grab robberies.
Yes, good point.
This is ridiculous. These groups of people, 40, 50 to 100 people, assemble outside a store and just go in there like gangbusters and steal everything.
That's not even, I wouldn't even call it crime. That's like flat out lawlessness. That's just the breakdown of civilization.
Yeah, that is anarchy.
Exactly.
smash and grab robberies. And then they go to expensive stores. So then they go to stores that have high-end goods. So it's not just the convenience marts that are happening. And then if somebody decides to defend themselves with guns, the liberals talk about how that is wrong too.
One way to eliminate private property rights is to just not enforce the law.
Yeah, and that happens a lot. The law is it's depolicing that is happening in these neighborhoods. And then there's the assaults on minorities like Asian Americans. So for whatever reason that is, you get these beatings. And Vadim at the beginning of the podcast talked about that. But elderly people for no good reason. People getting beat up violently. Not all robberies are muggings. They're just assaults.
They're just random beatings and assaults. I mean, it's outrageous.
So then the crime is hyper concentrated in certain areas. So 2% of all counties in the United States are home to 28% of the population, but they see about 50% of the murders. So let me say that again. So there's 2% of the counties that comprise 28% of the population. You with me right here? 2% comprise 28% of the population. Those locations have 50% of the murders. And then violent crime in these urban areas goes up too. We talk about street segments of neighborhoods. So 4% of urban street segments see 50% of total crime. And in New York City, that's between 3.7 and 4.2% of street segments see 50% of violent crimes. So I'm no law enforcement person at all. I have some military experience, but no law enforcement experience, and I didn't go to law school. But don't you think that we should have more police activity when we identify high crime areas? Do they do that already? They must do that.
I mean, yes, police focus resources on high crime areas. At least that's what it was pre-George Floyd. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think they've sort of pulled back.
So do we have enough police to patrol everything?
No, we don't. We need more policing. We need more investment in policing.
911 calls are not being answered?
Yes. Seattle, Portland. You look at all these Democrat-run cities. I think Seattle just said something like, if you call, don't expect your call to be answered.
Yeah, it's terrible.
It's just outrageous. I mean, it's just like un-American.
And then the victims of crime are low-income minorities in some of these neighborhoods. In New York City, 95% of shooting victims are Black and Hispanic.
Yes.
And we talked about the crumbling of the family that's going away.
Progressive policy prescriptions such as abolish the police, defund the police, decarceration. All of these policies hurt the same people that progressives say they're fighting for, Black and brown populations.
Yeah, and then unfortunately, white murders are covered more in the media, but the incidence of white murders have actually gone down over the years. Black murders have gone up 19.5 per 100,000 in 2019. In 2020, that went up 25.3 per 100,000 in 2020. So we're getting more African-American murder victims in these high crime areas.
Yes. Let me read another quote from Manguel's book, Criminal Injustice. Quote, "But for Black men, violence is the most urgent health crisis, and crime decline is the most important public health breakthrough of the past several decades. The impact on the decline in homicides on the life expectancy of Black men is roughly equivalent to eliminating obesity."
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Here's another myth. Progressives believe in more social welfare programs for the urban poor. And we understand that. That is part of their left-wing progressive movement.
Right.
And so we look at those, and the idea is to alleviate poverty and also improve education. And that doing those types of programs would reduce crime. But we're finding out that poverty is staying the same. And at the same time, crime goes down in some situations, according to James Q. Wilson and George Kelling. So this myth of a positive correlation between poverty and crime is often spurious. So when we talk about urban renewal, we talk about more social programs and more spending on education, you would assume that more jobs would turn into less crime, but that is not always so. And so these are the myths that we're taking a look at in this podcast.
Yep. It's
go ahead.
Morality and values.
Individual responsibility.
Exactly. Personal responsibility.
Family responsibility.
Yes.
And going more into economics and finance, and resorting to crime. If you go back to the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009 in New York City, African-American unemployment actually doubled, but then homicides and assaults went down during that time period. So there's not a consistent relationship with lower socioeconomic status and violent crime. You would think so, but if you look at the data, it's not so. It's really about having a culture of violence. Policing and punishment have changed over the years. While minorities have made gains in money earned, actually, there's more wage growth, but that has not turned into.
Speaking of cultural violence, I don't know if you saw this viral video of this little kid, must have been like 4 years old, and he's hitting a police officer. And he's calling him all kinds of, B word this, M word that. It's 4 years old. So what kind of a culture creates 4-year-olds that act that way?
That is something that we have to think about too. It's personal responsibility of the family. Who are raising these kids?
Exactly.
Where are they learning this? Is it social media? Are they learning it at school? Are they learning it from older brothers and sisters? Are they watching some of the video that has become viral about police misconduct?
I mean, kids imitate those around them, right? Even if they don't understand what's going on.
Well, there's the idea of community policing. And so this is the trend that you have police go out into the community, they talk to children, they register them on certain types of databases so they're not lost. They explain to children what they do and why they are members of the community. They get out of their squad cars and their police cars, and they patrol neighborhoods on foot, and they learn about the business owners.
And they introduce themselves and build a relationship with the community.
So there's humanity there too. And it creates people to report crime. And we'll get into that later because a lot of crime is not reported.
Correct.
And this skews the statistics on crime.
Right. Nobody wants to be a snitch.
That's right.
As the saying goes.
Yeah, that's right. But that culture of violence is something that we have to examine. And it also is about individual personality types that are more afflicted by crime, and that people who have personality disorders and antisocial dispositions and drug abuse are more likely to do the crime. Instead of having systemic racism, we see a little bit of that, but we also have people who have, personality disorders.
What do you mean by a little bit of that?
I think there is some racism from police. I think that is, if you take a subsection of the police population, you're going to have you're going to have some people who are going to be racist.
But that's true of any,
and that's true of society.
Of society in general, right? There are bad apples everywhere,
and there could be prosecutors that go too far in terms of race.
Right.
Yeah. But let's talk about people who are flawed in terms of antisocial personality disorder that are attracted to crime. The overall U.S. population affects between 2 and 4% of males, but in prison it affects between 40 and 70% of males. So let me talk about that a little bit more. So we have antisocial personality disorder in the overall U.S. population. Usually that only affects between 2 and 4% of males. But if you look at a prison population, it affects between 40 and 70% of males.
So like 20 times the rate of the general population.
Right. So you have to put these people in jail because they are antisocial.
Yes.
And that's scary.
Because they're a threat to other people.
Yeah. And so if you're saying that there are people who are in jail because of systemic racism and because incarceration is racist, you're not taking into account of people who are bad and need to be institutionalized. Also,
just to come back to this idea of systemic racism, there are bad apples. Bad apples are everywhere. That doesn't mean the system is racist. There are bad apples. There are outliers, essentially. I would argue that the criminal justice system, at least in the current environment, I think cops and judges and prosecutors, they actually go out of their way to not be seen as racist. So they actually give certain populations, particularly minority populations, a break that, let's say, a white male wouldn't get in certain instances. That's what I believe.
Times.
That's what I believe.
Yeah, I think the prosecutors may do that more than the police because of the George Soros prosecutors. They kind of try to swing the pendulum to the other way and go out of their way.
Yes.
I think the cameras, the video cameras have changed that quite a bit.
Right.
But these people with antisocial personality disorder and we make the wrong assumption about poverty. Poverty is not really an explanatory factor in antisocial personality disorder. People in prison are more likely to be addicts or substance abusers.
So I have a question, Brent. So is the antisocial behavior or antisocial personality disorder, I guess it is?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that nature or is that nurture? Probably the environment has a lot to do with it.
Environment has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, I don't believe people are born with antisocial.
Yeah, not being
a
criminologist or a psychologist.
I'm not either, but I'm just trying to think. People acquire that based on the environment that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, go ahead.
And then there's the drug culture too, which we talked about in the episode on fentanyl and methamphetamine.
Correct.
That people in prison are more likely to be addicts or substance abusers, more likely to be a part of violent street culture with drugs.
Drug offenses and violent offenses are correlated. If somebody is busted for drug offenses, you can be sure that they probably had a violent offense or vice versa.
Before and after.
Yeah, before and after. And vice versa. Like if somebody is arrested for a violent offense, they probably either did drug or they had, they were arrested prior for drug-related offenses. And so there's a lot of correlation there.
And remember, during the fentanyl and methamphetamine episode, we talked about how addicts, before they go into treatment, they have to hit a certain point in their life where they say, okay, enough, I'm going to go into rehab. And a lot of that is because they are arrested and they go to drug court and a judge says, okay, we're going to talk about jail time and prison time.
So jail is good for them.
Yeah, that is the place where they say, okay, I do not want to go to jail. I am going to try
it's
through the drug court.
Makes them reset and rethink their life.
If you don't arrest them, even for a minor possession situation, which a lot of reformers want to say, oh, they're nonviolent and it's just possession without intent to distribute. Okay, you release them again, they're not going to quit doing drugs. That's the problem. So this prison culture of addiction and substance abuse is something that criminologists and reformers need to take a look at because they're more likely to be a part of a violent street culture.
Right.
So that's something we need to take a look at. Now, abolition of police altogether. This was something that came about after George Floyd, and that the idea was to use more types of social welfare programs and more psychiatrists to deal with mental illness on the streets, reform cash bail, do away with cash bail, do away with jails. But the main thing is that people who are on jail do not commit crimes. I mean, that sounds really obvious, but we're getting away from that because we're finding out that people who would normally be in jail for pretrial detention are getting free and then they're committing crimes.
Yes. So that goes against cashless bail, right? But at the same time, I've never understood personally, like, why do you condition somebody being in jail based on how much money they have? That never made sense to me.
Yeah, because that assumes they're all poor. And that's not always the case.
Right. I mean, you have some rich kid who is comes from a billionaire family. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, he just posted $1 million bond, whatever. You hear stories like this. Some rich kid is accused of rape or something like that. And they're like, oh, yeah, he just posted bail, $1 million bond. I never understood why do you condition somebody's liberty on how much money they have? That made no sense. That never made sense. It should be based on risk, right? Are you likely to reoffend?
That you're likely to reoffend. We should take a look at that.
Correct.
I have a friend from college, good friend from college, and he was at the Washington Post for a number of years as a journalist and editor. And then he decided to leave the Post and become a documentary film director. And his first documentary that he did was on eliminating cash bail.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So he's a liberal.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay.
He wants to eliminate cash bail totally. Okay.
Did you talk to him?
I haven't talked to him.
What's
the way
his
I play
thinking
it,
on that?
I never got to sit down with him. I just kind of following through Facebook. When he posts, I like it because as a friend, I want him to be successful in his career.
Right.
But I think he's misguided, and I would like to show him some statistics.
The conservative message should be eliminate and replace, right? Eliminate cash bail and replace with risk as opposed to just eliminate, right? That should be the conservative message.
Yeah, most people who are awaiting trial are in jail. So you have county jail, county lockup before pretrial. And then you have prison. Now, prison is different than jail. So these are long-term incarcerations. Let's talk about the myths of prison. The United States has a higher rate of incarceration compared to other countries. You hear this a lot.
Right.
We have the highest prison population in the world. Compared to other countries, we incarcerate more. But it's really because of certain cities and neighborhoods not because of, you're comparing apples to oranges, really, a lot of the time. And
we also have a bigger population.
And we have a bigger population. But if you took out those neighborhoods where most people are getting arrested, you get a different crime rate.
Correct.
And a different imprisonment rate. So there's a little bit of a myth
We
there.
basically have two societies when it comes to crime. We have no crime and high crime.
And then a large proportion of these imprisoned are low-level offenders too. But if you decarcerate, you're going to release a substantial portion of violent criminals who will offend again. So we have to watch out for this depolicing and decarceration.
Not just offend again, but offend in high crime areas, in the same areas that progressives say they're helping.
And it also leads to homelessness. So what happens a lot in Los Angeles County is that people will be released from the county jail downtown. And then that will just send many of them are males. So they are homeless. They don't have any jobs. They don't have any money coming in. So they're more likely to commit crimes because they're just released into society and they become homeless. They don't have anywhere else to go. So that's a problem too when you decarcerate. How do you release a bunch of prisoners? And just say, okay, well,
you're free to go.
Just unlock the jail.
They did that
and let
during
people
COVID,
out.
Right? Didn't they release like 20% of prisoners?
I wasn't aware of that.
In LA County, I think Gavin Newsom, right?
Oh, that's right.
I remember. Yeah.
But 40% of convicted felons have long criminal records, and they're serious felons and have many prior arrests. 40% have prior arrests for violent felonies.
The average number of prior arrests for state prisoners range between 10 and 12. Okay. Arrests.
Yes.
And the average number of prior convictions is between 4 and 6. So it's not a 20-year-old who stole a bottle of water, because he was thirsty, or, he stole a bag of chips because he was hungry. Mm-hmm. He's a poor college student. No, these are real criminals, career criminals.
60% of state prisoners were jailed for violent offenses, and 95% of these state criminal cases are plea bargains. Now, plea bargains, since there's so many different plea bargains, so that is when you plead guilty to a lesser offense for a certain type of jail time that you would normally go to trial and you would plead innocent and you would go in front of a jury. Prosecutor meets with the public defender usually or the lawyer and says, hey, if you cop to a plea, we're going to give you maybe a little bit of jail time, a fine, and probation, rather than go to trial and risk getting the full maximum treatment. Well, 95% of these state criminal cases are plea bargain. Well, that means your criminal statistics are messed up. They're skewed because there may be a violent felony committed. But if you plead down, that means the conviction rate is a lower crime. So we're underreporting crimes. So
Correct.
Many crimes are underreported, but our statistics are getting skewed because of all the plea bargains, because you're pleading down to a lesser offense. So the conviction rate looks like it is not as serious as it really is because of these plea bargains.
And the median time served in prison is just 15 months.
Right. That's the other thing. So crime for those in prison is understated. And then 42% of state prisoners are released in a year. So we don't have these long-term incarceration rates because most people get out of prison. 64% of violent criminals were out in less than 10 years.
It's also a myth that a lot of people go to jail. I think there's only like 20% of convictions actually get prison time.
Oh, yeah. Because there's so much. Then that has to do, I think, with the plea bargaining system. And
Exactly.
You get a lot of people.
So the point is, in order for you to go to jail, you got to be a career criminal. You got to have, like I said, the average number of arrests was like 10 to 12.
10 to 12 arrests.
And then 4 to 6 prior convictions, right? So you have to be pretty much a career criminal in order to get any jail time at all.
Yeah, and the prosecutors are aware of this too. So you have the George Soros prosecutors who are not. They're not going after criminals in court.
Correct.
They're not prosecuting. They're not enforcing the law.
Yeah. So do you have any idea, like, if you are a Soros prosecutor, what goes through your head? Okay, this guy killed somebody, but I'm just not going to prosecute. Like, I don't understand. Why do they think they're doing a good thing? I don't understand that psychology. Like, what's so hard for them to understand that if you commit a crime, you have to do the time?
Well, there's a presumption of innocence that all prosecutors should have.
Of course.
And, maybe they think that the system is racist. And so they're trying to turn it around and they overcompensate for past injustices. I think they're there for.
So
if they're like a public defender,
right?
You're doing community service, or maybe as a lawyer, you're doing pro bono service.
Well, I'm not even talking public. I'm talking about, like, if you're a prosecutor, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say a person of color, should be charged with murder. Obviously, everybody is innocent until proven guilty. So I don't understand. So are they thinking, okay, this person shouldn't be charged because he didn't actually do it? Is that what this person was arrested because he's black? Like, I'm just trying to understand. I agree. There were prior injustices, right? But that doesn't mean that today's victims should pay for those past injustices.
Yeah.
That makes no sense to me, right? It's like saying somebody stole from your father 20 years ago, before you were born. So now you have a right to steal yourself from other people.
I think the myth is that when you're incarcerated, you are going to get institutionalized and you're more likely to commit more crimes because in prison you're planning the next crime or you're getting around more offenders. So you're more likely to commit crimes again. So therefore, if you don't prosecute, you've got overcrowded jails in the first place. And so the myth is that we prosecute too much for nonviolent crimes and put those people in jail.
Okay.
For non-criminal. Because we've talked about that.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah.
Right.
And then also
Manuel talks about that in the book. Yeah.
And then you have the drug culture where you're saying, okay, a possession of a substance is not as serious, so let's not criminalize that. So you decriminalize.
So I think progressives are misguided in this regard. Okay. If you do the crime, you have to pay the time. If
whatever the crime is,
you have to. Well, I'm saying not every crime leads to jail,
right?
But you have to be prosecuted, and you have to get whatever punishment is that's consistent with the law. Okay?
Well, there's this new move. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. Finish the thought.
So my point is, prosecution is very important. But I think where the problem lies is once somebody got convicted for a crime, I think the government has to work with employers to encourage employers to hire people who serve time, give second chances.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I think that would go a long way because I think a lot of employers do not want to hire somebody who had a conviction or maybe a drug offense or, maybe serve time in jail. So I think that's where the reform effort has to be focused, right? You have to pay the price for what you did, but we are Americans. We believe in second chances. Mm-hmm. So just because you made a mistake years ago, and you paid the price for that mistake, you should be allowed back into society and be given a second chance. So that's where I think the system needs to focus.
Yeah, that's a solution that we can discuss further, maybe towards the end of the podcast. Right. Let's go back to your original question about what goes through the mind of prosecutors.
Okay.
You have these progressive prosecutors and progressive mayors. And even now we're getting progressive police chiefs and sheriffs. And what they're saying is that certain crimes are minor. And if they're minor crimes, they shouldn't be arrested for it and they shouldn't be prosecuted. Now, when I say minor crimes, let me give you an example. City of Baltimore, very much a Democrat city. Mm-hmm. You have in certain areas, and it's not just in low income areas, but you have these groups of people who go up to a car and they squeegee the window. Mm-hmm. They clean your windshield.
Right.
And they expect to be paid.
Right.
They stand in front of your car until you give them money.
Okay. They don't move.
It's a shakedown.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. So they're essentially, it's almost like they're shaking people down for money. They're almost thief. And they also do carjackings too. So they'll stop you. Hey, I'm going to clean your windshield. And they do a carjacking.
Right.
The mayor of Baltimore and the prosecutors in Baltimore County are saying that those are minor crimes that should not be prosecuted. So there's this feeling that certain crimes you arrest for and certain crimes are so minor you don't.
So let's say this guy washes your window and then he says, okay, give me $5 or whatever.
Yeah,
anything.
Give me
whatever.
$20.
$20. Okay. And then he's not going to move in front of your car until you pay him.
Until you pay him.
Now, if you run that person over, you're going to be prosecuted.
Exactly.
But okay. So then how do you live in that society, right? Like if I can't move and I'm backing up traffic, You see, I mean, there's downside consequences.
They know they're not going to be arrested or prosecuted.
Okay.
So why not keep doing it? And this is not in poor neighborhoods. This is close to the Inner Harbor in Baltimore, which if you've ever been to Baltimore, there's this place called the Inner Harbor. Yeah. It's over by the football stadium and the baseball stadium.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful area. Yeah. Most of those businesses, I'm told by people who live in Baltimore, have closed down. Yeah. That tourist area has become overrun by these squeegee guys.
So squeegee guys, that's what they call them?
Well, that's what I call them. There's a different, I think people in Baltimore.
Let's call them squeegee guys.
Let's call them squeegee guys.
So these squeegee guys. So you do realize, Brent, like here's where the disconnect is in my mind. Okay. So they're not going to prosecute these squeegee guys. So essentially they have like an illegal business, right? Either you pay me, I'm not going to move, right? Okay. Now, do you realize, Brent, that if you wanted to open a car wash, right? You know how many regulations you have to follow?
Oh, sure.
If you want to open a car wash?
Environmental with the water, chemicals.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, you have to get a license and, you know, jump through all these hoops. Mm-hmm. So that's what annoys me about progressives. They don't create an equal society, right? They have, certain rules apply to certain segments that don't apply to others. And I don't understand, like, if these squeegee guys, right? If he's standing in front of my car and I'm backing up traffic, right? That means society can't move, right? Like if I'm a businessman and I need to get from point A to point B, right? In order to like sell a product or hire more people or whatever.
Trying to get to work.
Yeah. So that leads to breakdown of civilization in my view. So that's point number one. Point number two. So when they say, well, certain crimes shouldn't be prosecuted, that goes to the whole, what do they call it?
Broken window from James Q. Wilson.
That goes into the broken window policy, right? Because criminals feel emboldened, right? Well, if I can just break a window and steal a sandwich,
do some graffiti,
maybe I can steal a purse, and then maybe I can punch somebody in the face, and then maybe I can carjack a car. So there you go.
Criminals graduate to more serious crimes.
Exactly.
So if you don't start, crime leads to more crime. If you don't start arresting and prosecuting on minor crimes, you let minor crimes go. The criminals are very aware of who are prosecuting them. They know when there is a soft on crime prosecutor, and they'll wait until they can get a type of situation with a plea bargain with a soft on crime prosecutor. But offenders graduate to more serious crimes. That's James Q. Wilson who said that. He said, today's robber can be tomorrow's burglar and next day's car thief. They don't specialize. They graduate up.
Correct.
You see TV shows and Hollywood movies where there are people who just do robberies. Are there people who just do burglaries? That's another myth.
Yes.
People will do any type of crime of opportunity,
exactly,
especially if it's not being prosecuted or if they're not going to be caught. So today's flash mob, where somebody's going to go in and ransack a convenience store, they're going to graduate to ransacking and doing smash grab robberies to jewelry stores.
Correct.
Because they're going to find out that a minor crime, and there's this other myth about property owners. And we saw this during a lot of the protests during Black Lives Matter, is that business owners have insurance. So these types of thefts are covered by the insurance company. Therefore, they're not major crimes because the insurance company is going to reimburse the crime victim. And that is such a spurious, wrong thing. But the progressives conclude that all the time.
So insurance companies don't reimburse for something like this?
No. Let's say there's a smash and grab robbery, and you have business insurance to protect your property.
All of your stock is
stolen. Right. So you make a claim, and you probably have a deductible that you have to meet. And so you're going to be reimbursed for the property that's stolen. You're going to have to get money for fixing all the glass that is broken. So
counters.
When you talk to people on the progressive movement who want to reform the justice system and they want to depolice and decriminalize, they say this is not a major crime because it is a victimless crime.
Okay.
It's a victimless crime, and that the property damage is going to be reimbursed by the insurance company. So therefore it's a wash.
That's nonsense. And
that is nonsense.
Yeah. Well, let me ask a question. So will the insurance company reimburse in most cases something like this?
I don't know for a fact. I haven't lived through it before, but yeah.
Let's say it does. Even if it does, that's my business. I built this. I've built this business my entire life. It's not for you to decide what's victimless and what's not in my freaking business.
My private property is being destroyed and stolen.
Correct.
Therefore, it's a crime that should be prosecuted, and it's wrong.
Correct. It's like if I steal your laptop, Brent, there's no victim, right? Like, are you going to be happy?
Yeah, it's a victimless crime.
Yeah. Are you going to be happy?
I'm still a crime victim.
Right.
If you steal my laptop.
Yeah.
Certain areas, I think Chicago is a really good place for.
How about this? If my business is destroyed and I can't make any money, and then my wife has a medical issue the next day, and I can't pay for her medical expenses,
she becomes a victim.
Then she becomes a victim.
Yeah.
So this logic is nonsense.
There's knock-on effects of crime.
Exactly.
Yeah. But in Chicago, which is a good laboratory to study a lot, and the author of our book lived in Chicago for a while when he was going to law school.
Yep.
So he looked at a lot of statistics for Chicago, and he found that those arrested for shootings and homicides, 90% of those arrested had a prior offense.
Yep.
So they're graduating.
Exactly.
They're going up, and they're in the system already. They graduate to more serious crimes. If you let them out, they'll reoffend. So that's a myth, too. If they're in jail, they can't commit crimes. Do people who get institutionalized at a young age, does that lead to more crime? Well,
yes. I think if you start early.
If you're a juvenile.
If you start early and you don't pay a price for it, then you'll become a career criminal for sure. And you will progressively, I think, I don't have any research to back this up, but you're probably going to get progressively more criminal. Mm-hmm. The offenses that you commit will gradually go up, increase.
There's this idea of reducing jail population risk more crime. Now that's something too. If you get more people on the outside after they've been incarcerated, or maybe that they're waiting for their court hearing, and the LA County Jail in California is completely overcrowded, so people are getting let out, does this risk more crime? And I think the people who are looking at the statistics are saying yes, they are being arrested 5 to 10 times, and they're finding out that they can get out on a pretrial detention, even if there's cash bail, maybe they jump bail and don't, leave the criminal justice system, and they're never prosecuted. But this risks more crime if you let people out. And where do they go? They go back to the poor neighborhoods where they're from, and they have more victims of crime in poor neighborhoods. So it's this vicious circle of letting people out where they go back to where they're from. Yep. And it's not always about how much money they have. There's an example in the book about a criminal who received a settlement from a city. I think he was unjustly prosecuted, or he had an injury sustained by an arrest. But he cleared, $1 million to $2 million on the settlement. Now you would say, well, if he has $1 million to $2 million, he probably is going to buy a new house and move out of that situation. He becomes less a criminal because he has more money. No, that's not what happened. He just went right back out to what he was doing before, which was gang-related shootings.
So that tells you it's not about money, it's not about poverty. It's about behaviors and values and morality.
Yeah. Now, the other problem that we've had that we talked about that critics of police talk about is this militarization of police. Now, as a former officer and enlisted person in the Army, I do feel this is something that I disagree with by the author in the book. I do think that police have become more militarized. And this whole idea of giving them excess equipment and every police department having a SWAT team and M4s and mine resistance assault vehicles that are used. I think we have, since 9/11, we've had more police officers who are getting into that mentality where they need an M4 and they need to have bigger weapons to take on the criminals. And, you could see both sides of this. I think you have to be careful of militarizing police. Police are different. Police are first responders. They're not into, they respond, they report, they try to de-escalate, they arrest. And so you have to be careful with this. And I can give you an example where I used to live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. There was a group of cops that were part of a crime reduction unit, and they were in plain clothes. And they used M4s without uniforms. And an M4, I'm talking about assault weapon, military-style assault rifle, M4. Well, they went after a homeless person who was just living not in a homeless encampment. He was in, he was in public property, not private property. And this crime unit found out that this homeless person had a record of assault. They ran his name and they found out that he had assaulted a cop before. So they surrounded him. Now, this person, I think, had a history of some type of mental illness, and he did have a police record. But the crime unit was in plain clothes. So this homeless person was very confused about who was surrounding him and attacking him. So he came out of his tent, and the group of police officers formed a circle around him with their M4 rifles. And he had 2 penknives. A penknife is a small knife with a very small blade. And they used a flash bang grenade. You don't know what a flash bang grenade? That's a military weapon. Not a weapon. It's a way to stun people and confuse people when you're going to go in to a house with terrorists. Use a flash banger. It doesn't explode, but it creates a sound that scares people, and it creates a flash that scares people, and it blinds you. So the police encircled this guy and threw a flashbanger at him. And then when he did that, he pulled up with his knives, and then they shot him with their M4s. Now, that's a situation where I'd say that's police brutality and borderline murder. So we have to be careful when we give police a lot of these weapons. You know, they're outgunned by the cartels for sure. So, you know, our border states, your Californias, your New Mexicos, your Arizonas, and Texas are dealing with cartels down at the border. And then you do have to have weapons. Sinaloa and Chicago, you have to be careful with that. So there's a fine line. You know, we have to be careful when we militarize police for that very example that I gave you right now. So surplus military equipment creates this war zone mentality. Is it a deterrent to offenders when they're heavily armed? You have to be careful with that. And especially with people who are diagnosed with mental illness. And now with the meth addiction and the meth epidemic that is causing a lot of people to have symptoms of mental illness, police have to be very aware of what they're dealing with. So it's a problem. And there's not ready answers to this. But we hope we're getting close to about an hour of this podcast.
So let me ask a question. What do you think of no-knock warrants?
That's a good question. I think that has a lot to do with the prosecutor and the geography. So where are you doing these no-knock warrants? You have to make sure you have the right address. And you have to make sure that you're not targeting a type of offender that could possibly shoot back. You know, do you bring in the SWAT? Yeah, how do you figure out who's violent? You go to the wrong house. You exchange gunfire. You know,
I see nothing wrong with no-knock warrants personally.
I think if they're federal, at the federal level, they're done better than at the local level. I think the DEA does a good job with no-knock warrants because I think they're better trained. A lot of training has to be involved. You know, you have to make sure that you want to see people's hands. You want to make sure a lot of the times they're sleeping. Are they going to run? Do they have weapons? I mean, but going back to it doesn't have to be a no-knock warrant to be dangerous. You can pull over somebody and approach their vehicle and ask for a license and registration and be shot.
Right.
You know, so all situations are dangerous.
It reduces the risk.
Which one?
No-knock warrants of police being harmed.
It could, because let's say they're sleeping and you do it in the dead of night.
Right.
They're less likely to be violent if they're sleeping.
Correct, but also doesn't give them time to
arm themselves,
to get a gun, to grab a gun, you know, to kind of prep that.
Yeah, the no-knock. I mean, not being a federal law enforcement officer, it's very hard. But identifying yourself, do you give that person time? You know, you knock on the door and say, "Federal law enforcement, open up."
Here's what I think. Right, I think an outright ban on no-knock warrants is probably the wrong idea, but they definitely have to be scrutinized. Like, I think, you know, when you seek a warrant, you have to explain why do you think a no-knock warrant would be appropriate in this situation?
This person has a record of gun offenses.
Okay.
This person has a record of assault with a deadly weapon. So this person can be armed and dangerous.
Exactly.
So you determine that
correct.
due to prior arrests.
There has to be an extra step that you have to justify. Why do you believe a no-knock warrant would be justified in this situation?
And this person could be a fugitive, so the marshals, U.S. Marshals get involved. This person could be a violent drug offender and dealer, so the DEA gets involved. This person could be a bank robber, so the FBI gets involved. I think federal law enforcement does, and you could argue about this because SWAT teams are very well trained too, but you have to do this on a case-by-case basis.
Correct. Summing up, we have a crime problem in America. Abolishing or defunding the police is a bad idea. We need to invest more in police. We do need to reform the bail system so that it focuses on risk instead of cash.
Well, we have reduction of police budgets. We want to make sure that we don't hamstring police and what they're trying to do. We have activists who are demonizing police. We have to make sure that we can create a police force where people do want to serve with the badge and doing a very dangerous job for us. And so we have cities where people don't want to be cops anymore. They're quitting.
Correct.
And you can't retain them. You can't recruit them.
Correct.
And so then the response time is low. Then there's not enough people to patrol the dangerous areas. And so this begets more problems. You have erosion of public safety. So this is what we worry about.
Decarceration is a bad idea.
Most prisoners are habitual violent criminals. If let out of prison,
Yes.
they will offend again.
Correct.
So if you are not prosecuting them to the full extent of the law, you have a problem. We have prosecutors and mayors and city council members who believe in minor crimes should not be arrested and should not be prosecuted. These people do not specialize in minor crimes their whole criminal career. They graduate to more serious crimes, and they don't specialize in a certain type of crime. They do all kinds of different crime. So we have to be aware of that.
Fighting crime helps everybody, but especially the Black and brown communities, the same communities that progressives say that they're fighting for.
Yeah, they wouldn't dare walk these neighborhoods, but they want to help. And their bad policies result in repercussions in the neighborhoods that they think they're trying to help.
Correct.
Okay, well, I hope you've heard some things that jog your interest and you can do some of your own research on this. The book is called Criminal Injustice by Rafael Mangual. And he is a lawyer by training, but he has decided that he's going to serve in a think tank and do a lot of deep research into some of these myths and provide data to show people that, hey, decarceration and depolicing is not a good thing.
Check out this book. It's a great book. It's a fairly quick read. The author does do a good job of laying out the statistics and digging into the data to debunk the progressive narratives on crime.
And show you myths. So hope you have a great rest of your week, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Truth Caviar Show. Email us at truthcaviarshow@gmail.com and let us know what you think about the show. And remember, no bias, no bull, no fear, just hard truths.